and really important that you go from the large to the detail.
So how did you get started in the industry?
Well, my family were in the construction industry, and from an early time, we had not only our own mills, but our own joinery factories, plumbers. We had all the trades, plumbers, painters, the whole works. And I used to hang around the office and make a nuisance of myself. It was quite a big company, the biggest and oldest in Taranaki at the time. And I just felt an affinity for building, for whatever. So I learned quite a bit about it. And I was used to work on building sites in my school holidays and university holidays. And I just sort of became engrossed in the idea of doing architecture. I was fortunately I had a very good art teacher at the New Plymouth Boys High School, and he saw I was really slick on drafting. I was really, for some reason or other, I picked it up. Those days we had T-squares and boards and whatever, and pencils, which we used to sharpen. And I became a very, very good draftsman. And he persuaded me that I should go further and maybe get into architecture, because generally it was expected I would go into our building company, our family company. And I didn't want to do that. So I went to university and I just loved it. I loved every minute of it. And from there on, it sort of grew. I got married. I qualified in 1960, and I left school in 1955 and went to university in 1956. Qualified in 1960, got married in 1961, and in December 62, we travelled to Europe in a ship with a baby. We'd had a baby by then, and I travelled around Europe for 6 months in a dormobile, in a van, living in this van, living on the smell of an oily rag, obviously, at a time when there weren't hundreds of tourists. This is 1964 by then. And I just became fascinated with the old buildings in Spain and Italy, old and new, of course, and Corbusier. I went to see all his works. And it became a fascination. I came back, I was working in London in an office, and I got a message that a company in New Plymouth had wanted me to come back and join them. And we just had another baby then, so we had 2 kids. And I thought, well, maybe it's time to come back to New Zealand, which we did in 1965. And I joined this company. I became a partner about 8 months later. And then 50 years ago this year, I started my own company, went out as Terry Boon Architect. So that's how I got into it.
That's amazing. So I'm really curious about the working on the building site, and do you think that was important as part of your design and part of your drawing?
Absolutely. I learned so much about. I'm not particularly skilled with my hands, but I could see how people worked and what they needed. And even now, I've always encouraged people in our office to go on the site. They have to go out and site visit. I know I've got a lot of friends, and in Wellington, some of the big companies, I know everybody, and they have students or architects, newly qualified architects working for them, and they never go on a site. They're doing all these drawings and carrying on, but they never go and see it in action and see what the guys are on the site are actually trying to make these things work. I've always believed it's terribly important that you get out there and understand what's happening on the building site.
I think it's really important as well. When I left university, my first job was I worked for the Ministry of Works with Morris and Russell. And my first job on site, well, the first thing they did was to give me a job to administer on site.
Yes.
And you stand in front of the builder and he says, what the heck's this detail? How do you expect me to do this?
What's this detail? I can't read it. I can't understand it.
Yeah, you go back to the office and you won't draw that detail ever again.
No, and even the size of lettering in the old days, which of course is now different with computers, but you had to have it so they could read the thing when they had a drawing, particularly the old before they had we had ammonia paper with it used to fade, and they'd be out there with spilling their tea in the at smoko, and they're trying to read these silly little printed drawings. So you had to understand what it's like for these guys on the site.
Yeah, the ammonia didn't like the sunlight. They used to fade pretty quickly.
No, I mean, it's totally different now, obviously. But so you had to be conscious of the guys on, and even the detailing and how you relate things. They've got to be able to understand what a guy wants. He wants the big picture, then he wants the detail. And sometimes they don't have their references as clear as they could be. It's getting much better, but it's really important that you go from the large to the detail, and easily, so you can follow it easily, which sheet it's on, which drawing number, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, that's a real technical part of the job, isn't it? So there's the design, which is the fun bit, and then there's the real technical part of making sure your details work, make sure your documentation's clear.
Exactly.
But going back to your university, did other people that you were at university with, did they have the same experience as you on site?
I'm not sure. Some of them may have. Quite a number came from the Ministry of Works, because in those days the ministry had a great program for encouraging young guys and supporting them, didn't they? I think, and a lot of them were very good.
I was just curious whether you were with other people at university and you noticed that some of them would draw things and you would look at it and say,
"Oh yes,
there's no way you can do that."
They didn't work. No, there were some that were totally impractical. Sometimes beautiful drawings, but not making any sense. So, and the buildings also, you got to have, not so different now, but with the detailing, you wanted your building not to leak, preferably.
Absolutely. Well, that's a big thing.
Handy, the clients prefer it if their buildings don't leak, apparently. Very demanding.
Because I was curious, because when I went to university, I went straight from high school, and I had no experience at all.
I was the same, but I had this other experience. Yeah.
So the other thing was you spent all this time with this fascination of these old buildings. Did that affect the way that you designed and drew your drawings?
I'm not sure, really. I always found that I would have a concept come pretty quickly to my mind. I used to be very careful about studying the site and the location and I tried to understand the nature of the site, which drives the design, really, where the wind is, where the sun is, what's neighbouring, what are the spaces you've got to deal with, and so on. It's quite complicated. It's not just the building itself, it's how it relates to the site and to everything that's around it. And I think people have got to understand that, and some don't. Some look as though their little darling buildings are the only thing that matters, and it's not. It's the way they relate to other buildings.
I think most of us have had some overseas experience, and again, I think that's absolutely vital to New Zealand to bring those high skills back.
Yes, and also understand you learn so much from living in other countries and meeting other people and realising we've all actually got two eyes and a nose and a mouth and two ears generally, but some of the way we relate to things are slightly different, not madly different, but the way things are built and the history, particularly where there's hundreds of years of buildings.
Yes.
That which we don't have in New Zealand, it's getting a bit longer now, I guess, but we never had that depth of built environment, which was so important and often very beautiful. Some of the buildings were magnificent.
Just before we started recording, you and I were just having a wee chat about working in London, and I made the comment that I guess I wasn't really surprised, but the ease in which you can just work into like an English building site or an English design office, how all of the detailing is actually quite easy to translate from one place to another.
Yes, exactly. It's definitely universal, no question about it.
keeping water out is universal. And one of the things that, I teach the students about surface tension and how we have to make sure that we don't detail so that the water can travel through surface tension. And then you go to these old brick buildings in London, and the stone sills have got that lovely drip line underneath, which you wouldn't know unless you like grab hold of it and felt underneath it.
Feel underneath it, exactly. Yep. Yeah. Well, they're pretty clever, some of those buildings. I mean, the use of bricks, of course, was something that was different, really. And one of the major things when I came back was that our office had been involved in quite a bit of precast work, and in New Zealand at the time that wasn't happening. And if it was happening, it was pretty crude. Often, it's got more sophisticated now, obviously, but 1964, precast units were pretty limited in New Zealand. I think Christchurch School, Miles Warren and Bevan and Co., they started doing it. But for New Zealand, generally, it didn't apply. And I had contractors asking me how to do it, because they'd get some drawings from maybe an out-of-town architect in New Plymouth, and they didn't understand how to do precast. So that's a simple sort of example of how things change and how the universal thing takes a while to get through.
But it's an example of bringing that technology that you learned back,
exactly,
and improving New Zealand,
and realising that, as you've found that it was easy to slot in so we're not just alone on our own. We're just part of a whole universal thing.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Terry. The next podcast, I think we should talk about what you think we should be teaching our students. So thanks very much for joining us, and talk to you on the next podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.